students are using AI in the upper grades. And I think about that, like, they've got these tools, and so they've got to know how to use these tools. And that really starts in the lower grades, the primary grades, building that foundation, how to think critically with AI and, use it responsibly.
This is the Discovery Files podcast from the U.S. National Science Foundation. I'm Nate Potker. From helping establish the foundations of the modern internet to sustaining AI research through multiple decades of technological change, NSF has consistently invested in the people, ideas, and infrastructure that drive scientific progress. That tradition continues by advancing AI for science, strengthening America's research enterprise, expanding opportunities for researchers across the country, and preparing the skilled workforce needed to drive the industries and discoveries of the future. We're joined today by Carrie Robledo, 2026 Presidential AI Challenge National Champion in the Educators track. Part of an NSF-supported educational effort called Elementary AI, her project prepares second-grade students for an AI-driven future by combining machine learning concepts with insect identification. Mrs. Robledo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So I want to start with asking you to define your project. What is AI Insect Detectives?
AI Insect Detectives is a project that I did with my second grade students during our enrichment block. So for 1 week, 5 days, 20 minutes each day during that time, the students participated in this AI activity. We were learning about insects in our ELA unit in our science block. And so I thought, what better place to learn about AI, right? And so students classified insect, not an insect on paper. And then we said, okay, here's how computers learn, because our students are using their phones, they're unlocking, devices, Alexa, right? And so how does that actually work? And so we wanted students to understand that the human in the loop is the most important part, and that it's all about how you train the data. And so that's what students did. They used Teachable Machine, Google's Teachable Machine, and we liked that platform because it was free, didn't collect any student information. And then the students went in and trained the data, like using insect pictures and then non-insect pictures that I had compiled from iNaturalist. And talked about, how iNaturalist, we've collected those pictures from North Carolina, so we singled that into where we live. And then they sorted those out, trained the data, and then they tested their cards, so new cards. And they said, wait a minute, why is this card saying, like they scanned a cardinal, and they said, this is saying insect. A cardinal is not an insect, right? And so our students said, I wonder why. And then I had one student raise their hand, and they said, well, we trained the data on ladybugs. We used a lot of pictures of ladybugs and said, these ladybugs are insects, and they're red and black. So maybe the AI is seeing like red and black, those pixels, and saying, hey, this is an insect because it's red and black. And we know that's not true. So the students said, let's retrain it and give more pictures of non-insects that are red and black. And they saw, where their errors were, and they realized that AI makes mistakes. And it's all about who's training that AI.
How did the students react to using AI tools? Like you mentioned, they have phones and things now. Is it really strange to them to be working with programs in this way, or does it come pretty naturally?
Naturally, yes, but also they don't have that deeper understanding of how it actually works, right? And so they just think, like one of the questions, because I did pre and post assessments each day, and one of the questions were, the beginning, are computers always right? Do computers make mistakes? And the students were like, oh yeah, they just know, like computers know, right? They can recognize that a dog is a dog, right? And so they had that notion that it's right. But when they started diving into programming their own AI, they realized, oh wait, computers are not always right. And so that was very important for me, for them to realize, like, computers make a mistake, AI makes mistakes, and how we fix that and recognize. That's the most important part, is recognizing those errors and that those are out there.
How did they react to finding out that computers are wrong? Like, was that a surprise to them?
It was. And then when we started diving into where else we see AI in the world, they're like, oh, so that's why our local fast food joint that is AI, like when you order, they have an AI, component that
Like the
takes your order.
kiosks there,
Yeah, and it's never right. And they're like, is that why? Because it wasn't trained on like our voices. And so they're realizing like, oh, it needs more data. These applications that we use, our mom's phones aren't always right, right? And so realizing that they make mistakes, and that was very eye-opening for them.
And that's very cool having a local reference point, like something that they've interacted with in real life that
Oh,
they can tie
yes.
back into the concepts.
Yes.
Same with the insects, using local insects is great.
One of the things that really stuck with me and made me realize like they've got it was at the end of our lesson, they said, one of the students said, "So, you know, who programmed the app on my mom's phone? And what if they're making the same mistakes that we did?" That was the they got it moment. And that was exactly what I wanted my students to take away from this project.
Right, setting the building blocks that'll inform the next steps as they go and showing them that there's next steps and getting that critical
Absolutely.
thinking around technology and
Absolutely.
what you see on the internet. So it's
Absolutely.
such
And,
great
we
stuff,
know that students are using AI in the upper grades. And
right?
I hear my colleagues talking about it all the time. Like they're not using it. I think of the Peter Parker Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility quote. And I think about that, like they've got these tools. And so they've got to know how to use these tools responsibly. And that really starts in the lower grades, the primary grades, building that foundation. So when they're in these upper grades, they know how to think critically with AI and, use it responsibly.
Backing out a little bit, this was part of a project with elementary AI at a broader thing. Can you talk a little bit about how you entered that collaboration to begin with?
So I previously worked at the Friday Institute at NC State, and during my time there, I met Dr. Tiffany Barnes in a meeting, and she said, "I'm really interested because she heard of my background in elementary, and she said I'm very interested in partnering with a district, um, particularly with K-5 students and teachers, on how AI impacts, students and teachers." And I am from rural North Carolina, and I'm always thinking about my home district and the opportunities that could be available to them. And I said, I think I have just the district in mind for you. For this project. And so that's how our collaboration began with, Dr. Tiffany Barnes and her team, and then Montgomery County Schools, where I live, where I went to school. I'm a product of Montgomery County Schools. And now I'm back in the classroom here teaching in Montgomery County Schools.
Thinking about that background in the schools there, what kind of computers or AI techniques, products were students being introduced to before this project got underway?
We are really like on the ground level here, just getting started. All students have devices, and they we're using different apps to collaborate and create, but not necessarily looking at AI yet. And so this was their first experience using like Google Teachable Machine and learning how AI actually works. And in fact, I did a like what is AI question to my students, and I was very proud because they said artificial or fake. They said it's fake, and so they're like seeing the word artificial, right? And knowing that word means fake. So I was very proud of that. They didn't have that true understanding of what AI is yet. And so by doing this project, they were able to have that deeper understanding. Um, and it fit right into our curriculum. So it wasn't just one more thing that we had to teach, right? It was just right into our science and our ELA block.
Thinking about that curriculum and introducing these things, were there pushbacks from, say, administration in the schools or parents about using these kind of techniques with kids this age?
No, absolutely not. I am very fortunate to have such a supportive administration who was like, "Yeah, let's do it." In fact, my principal, she observed me during a lesson, and so she sat in and was like, "This is really cool." Like she said, "I didn't realize that's how AI worked, and they're using vocabulary like pixels and data, and that's very advanced for second grade." And so,
Right.
and then the parents, we had a STEM night, STEM science night at our schools, and the parents were able to come to my station and see what the students trained their Google Teachable Machine training data. And then they looked at iNaturalist. And then I had the parents share what is AI and where do you see that in your life? And so that was very powerful to see what their responses were.
Moving into the how you put the curriculum together a little bit, did you have to think of specific approaches to make the technology accessible for kind of different kind of learners?
Yes. So, we started, I knew I wanted to have like tech free, unplugged first, right? And so I looked at what I was teaching and I said, where does the technology, where does this fit? And that was right into insects, right? So I said, I know I have this unit coming up and students are going to be classifying. Um, so let's do a traditional sort or a paper sort. And so getting that tactile, that hands on for our students. And then we also watched like videos so they had a deeper understanding of like components of an insect and how they have, the different parts. That was helpful in that vocabulary, building that background for those learners. But also as we were doing this, because this was also my first time with Teachable Machine. Like I was like, let's do this, right? I first had the students scan the cards. Like I printed out a bunch of images and had them go around and scan, and that did not go great at all. I was like, okay, so we're going to pivot because that's what teachers do. We're very used to that, right? And I said, I have all of these images in Google Drive. And so I taught the students, it was very simple for them to just drag and drop them into Teachable Machine without having to scan those images. And so that was helpful. Just being able to be flexible and be ready for mistakes. And then, there were questions that I wasn't really sure of the answer to. We don't know it all, but the students, they taught me quite a lot too. Because when I would scan like myself on the computer, it was telling me that I was an insect. And I said, why is this happening? And I was I had a black like fabric board behind me. And they said, well, maybe that's a big board behind you. Maybe you should move. And I was like, that's a great idea. And so these are 8-year-olds saying, like, move, right? And sure enough, I moved my computer, scanned myself, and it said, not an insect. So being willing to listen to the students and get their take on it as well, and having them take the ownership in their learning was very powerful.
And speaking of powerful impacts, this project won the first presidential AI national challenge. Can you talk us through your journey from being aware of the challenge to submitting and the various steps along the way to your win?
So Dr. Barnes came to us and said, hey, we'd love to put together some projects to submit for this inaugural presidential AI challenge. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. This was back last year around, the fall. And I said, let's see where this could fit. And so I wasn't really sure with it being the first time, like what to expect. The task was to teach students AI in a unique way. And so I said, all right, I have this unit coming up in the spring. So where does this fit? And then I submitted it. I hadn't done the lesson yet, but I said, this is what I will do. And so I just thought, all right, we submitted it. Let's see what happens. And then I got a notification that, oh, you've won for the state for North Carolina. I was like, wow, I actually called Dr. Barnes and I said, I'm a state winner. Like, what? What? I was very shocked. And so I came, you know, then it was time to do the lesson because we were coming up on that unit. And I said, perfect, we're gonna do this. And I had my regional interview and that went exceptionally well. I just felt really good about, the feedback from the judges and um, just the overall experience there. And then it's very funny because they announced the regional winners, and like I had my students all sitting around, like, because it was a live announcement. And I was like, all right, we're going to watch this. And it was right after field day. So we were all hot and sweaty and just end of the day. And my computer just kept loading and loading. And I said, oh, okay, then the bell rings and they leave. And then my phone starts dinging and it said, congratulations. Like my husband, my best friend, they're all texting me, like, you won. And so I said, oh, so I found out secondhand because my computer was loading, but I was able to go back in and show my students later too the recording. So I was like, oh my gosh, it was unreal. And then found out, got invited to DC, and that was just an incredible experience in itself too.
What was the kids' reaction to finding out that this program was such a success?
They were like ecstatic. They're like, "You get to go to Washington?" And we looked at the map, and then so school was getting out shortly after that. So um I can't wait to see them when we go back so we can, they'll come back to my room and say like, "Tell me about your trip." In fact, I had parents during the live announcement from DC that were texting me like because they were watching the live stream, like, "Oh my gosh, congratulations." And so it was an amazing experience. And then some of the parents were commenting like, Ivy said you didn't take her with you, or, like you're supposed to take them with you. So that was really cool. Ran into several of them over the summer, and just being able to share some stories with them. And in fact, one of my students gave me like insect earrings. I'm not wearing them today, but it was a very hungry caterpillar. And
Mm.
I wore those on the day that I competed and presented and won. And so I messaged her mom and I said, please let her know that I'm wearing her earrings in Washington, D.C. When I was announced the national champion. So that was very neat.
Fantastic. Can we tease this experience apart a little bit? Can you talk about what coming to Washington entailed and how you felt about everything that went on once you were here?
The team that set it all up, they were absolutely amazing. They thought of everything. And so, they sent us a shirt to wear to the airport. They arranged all of our travel there. They had all of our accommodations. So that was very nice. They picked us up from the airport, took us to the facility where we stayed, and then they, the welcoming, like just amazing experience there. Man, we got shirts that I'm, proud to wear now, of course, and then bags, just all of the swag. Teachers love free stuff too, right? So we were super excited, like, oh my gosh, did you see this? Um, and then we were able to go to the Air and Space Museum that first night on Sunday. And then, Monday we woke up and it was time to go to the Mellon Auditorium. And wow, a beautiful facility, beautiful building. Um, and that's where, we had the competition and a nice lunch. And then the educator winners were announced. And then from there, we got to go to the educators were invited to Microsoft's offices where we had a meeting with them. And then we went the next day to the White House. And so it wasn't, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to go because the team was always saying, well, maybe, because we're never sure. Um, and so they're like, just make sure you have all your documents, when you come to DC. And so we found out we would be at the White House and in the East Room. And I'm still like this small town girl from North Carolina in the White House in the East Room. And then my name was announced as the winner. And someone mentioned to me that, like, oh, yeah, if your name is announced like during a ceremony at the White House, it goes to the National Archives. I still need to verify that, but I want to believe that's true. So small town girl here in the White House. And so I'm texting like my family and friends, like selfies. And then we had a reception in the Rose Garden, and then it was time to go back home the next day. It was just a whirlwind experience. I'm still like, did that happen? Um, but what I'm very, most fond of, winning, of course, but the people that I met and that I was able to collaborate with, the fellow educators, the students, learning about their projects and what's happening in their schools. That was a very uh, I loved that experience. And we're still texting now, the educator group, like, so that's great. And being able to collaborate and having that experience with them was amazing.
right? Pick up some new peers and collaborators as things
Yes.
move on down the road. I think you're safe to assume that your win will be in the National Archives in some capacity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Coming out of that win, can we talk a little bit about, from your perspective, how did NSF support help make this project happen?
Providing the funding for, first of all, our project, Elementary AI. Without that funding, you know, we've been able to work with teachers and students to get that started here in our district where it
Mhm.
didn't previously exist. Like our students before were not talking about AI, we're not having those conversations yet. And so that was the catalyst for all of this. So elementary AI, without that funding, none of this would have been possible. And so having that made it all happen. And then, of course, being able to work with the professors and the PIs of the project, Dr. Barnes. It's just been a great opportunity for rural North Carolina, for our small town with limited access. Because we're not close to the research institutions, we're not close to big universities, and so having that funding has allowed for those opportunities to come to life.
And I think probably demonstrates to the students the possibilities outside of small town. Like
Absolutely.
thinking that how big the world can be, especially when you go to the White House and they get to see all of these things happen. They're like, oh my gosh,
Right.
this is real. Someone
Right.
I know has been there. Um, I want to think about that first class's results and impressions here. Like, can you talk a little bit about how the students reacted ultimately to that first class going through the project?
They were just super impressed at how they were able to train an AI. And so they started talking about different ways. Oh, wait, so we could do this with shapes. It doesn't have to be just insects. We could train AI on shapes, on different moves. I showed them a demonstration of like a robot and how it was programmed to go to the different choices. And they said, let's do that next. And so it just sparked that curiosity in them and to see like, what's next? So now they have that expectation, like, we've done this before, so we're ready to do more. Right. And so and it made learning fun. So instead of just taking out their workbook and drawing the lines to connect, right? They were able to actually make it real world and make it fun.
So you mentioned robots and thinking about what's next. And for my last question, I want to ask you about where you want to go with this project next, and maybe what learnings or takeaways you had that you want to adapt into the next phase here.
For this upcoming year, would love to expand upon this project. So I did this with second grade, but I'd love to work with the upper grades as well and have them build it using pictures from like our school garden and thinking about, insects that we find out there and having them take the pictures or even bringing in pictures from home. And so doing like a school-wide collaboration and making it like a school insect detectives. And I'd love to, could we make our own version of iNaturalist or, an app similar to that, but for our school community, right? And so seeing how this could expand, not just for second grade, but for our whole school community and families.
Special thanks to Carrie Robledo. For the Discovery Files, I'm Nate Potker. Please subscribe wherever you get podcasts, and if you like our program, share with a friend and consider leaving a review. Discover how the U.S. National Science Foundation is advancing research at nsf.gov.